Mr. Kyrylo, for 3 years now, our country has been heroically fighting the superior enemy, and the Kremlin threatened to take Kiev in 3 days. But this did not happen, thanks to the heroic resistance of all defense forces and the entire Ukrainian people. However, how do you assess the current state of their army and their conditions, what they can do and what they want?
Well, first of all, the goals of the Russian Federation remain the same. They have not abandoned them, and they have spoken about it publicly, by the way. And their supreme leader says that the goals of the special operation must be achieved. So it is definitely not a secret for anyone. Today is the 3rd anniversary of the full-scale invasion. You said it right. For 3 days, Kiev turned into the 3rd anniversary of the full-scale invasion. So obviously something, as they say in quotation marks, went wrong. As I estimate the state now, the professional army was wiped out somewhere around 2023. Then Russia is at war. Well, they are called mobilized, although formally they are all contract soldiers, but the approach is the same for mobilized. Person is taken away, a maximum of 2 weeks, and he is at the front. They are fighting purely in numbers.
Let me clarify. If you say that the goals are the same, but you see he is one of the most informed people, probably in the country and in the world. And how do they want to achieve this if having a professional army at that time? They could not achieve the minimum goals that they wanted and still have not even taken the Ukrainian Donbass. What does their military and political leadership expect in this?
We shouldn't deceive ourselves either. Unfortunately, we have to admit that since 2022, this is just a statement of fact. Look at the map. That was on February 21st, 2022, and what is it today? It is not true to say that they have not achieved anything. They are moving forward. This is absolutely not the pace they expected. In most areas they managed to stop them. They are permanently successful in certain areas too. So it is correctly to understand that this war is destructive for them as it is destructive for us, and they have the potential to move forward.
And how long will this material last? After all, these are still very large losses, and we trust our defense forces, we see their losses. It is quite costly in terms of personnel and equipment.
It is a very expensive war. 1 day costs a little than $1 billion for them. This is a huge amount of money. As for the human potential, again, we shouldn't deceive ourselves. The mobilization potential of the Russian Federation will calculately allow them to move on. But the pace and numbers of victims, yes, they cannot. They cannot ignore this, so they are taking it into account.
Then if we talk about human potential, we see that there are reports in the information space that North Korean units are being involved, and that there is a separate recruitment of foreigners. Plus, there are units and weapons involved, both North Korean and Iranian. But given this, we can say that this is already a kind of World War III, or is it a prelude to it?
Listen to this philosophical question, how to look at it. For me, yes, because the vast majority of the strongest and most developed countries in the world are involved. It's just a fact.
I understand that you have the most powerful analytical department, but how do you forecast development options? This involves other centers of power, both on our side and on the other side, especially on the part of the enemy.
You want to go deep, but let's try to see. Let's start with the fact that the use of North Korean troops, in principle, this is a humiliating fact for the Russian Federation, the country that proclaims itself a world leader, or at least the second most powerful army in the world. Well, it is humiliating, but the reality is that they had to do it. How the Poles of this war will act is an interesting question too. For the North Koreans, everything is fine here because they are the main beneficiary of the profits of this process. Their army is gaining combat experience that it hasn't had since the 1950s, in fact, and the first use after training in Russia showed that it was just a nightmare. That is, they were definitely not ready for anything in the current reality. They will go back. They will start retraining their army. This is the second sin. They rolled their weapons here in the fiercest battles. The most interesting fact that I propose you to dwell on is the use of North Korean missile batteries, the use of North Korean ballistic missiles of the KN-23 type. These are the first uses. They showed absolutely no hit accuracy. There were deviations of 1.5 kilometers or more. Russian experts worked with North Korean specialists at the factories, redesigned and modernized them, and now these missiles are hitting targets. Then, the North Koreans learned what drones are, they had never seen them before, and so on and so forth. Now all this will start to come back, the army will be re-equipped, the army will be retrained. And it is clear that a new threat will emerge for the Pacific region, because it was one thing when they were firing directly towards the Japanese Sea, and everyone was, as they say, very nervous. But let's be honest, everyone realized that the accuracy and quality were not how it would work. And now it's over. Everything will work. Content is only one aspect, a small, very small aspect. We can go all over the world like that. Just look at what's happening. Many people say that Russia has entered Africa and so on. They are fulfilling their strategic goal of cutting Africa from west to east and from east to west. So you can call it wherever you want. Just to cut it so that everything that moves one way or another goes through them. To say that they are not succeeding, it is not true. Yes, they are being pressured. In several countries their plans have been destroyed, but they are trying to continue. The African Corps has not stopped its work at all, it is only expanding. They were kicked out of Syria, so now they are settling in Libya. They are leaving systematically. There are problems in Latin America, in Central Asia, they are trying to even go into Myanmar. And there are Russians, the military there.
So they are repeating somewhere the paradigm that was in the Soviet Union.
Absolutely. The question here is that Russia is not the Soviet Union. It's just, well, the question of whether there will be enough resources, when in principle the Union did not last, although they were moving quite confidently. And that's why Russia will try to restore its empire, and for this it needs Russia, Belarus and Ukraine. There is no other option. Belarus, somehow they feel more or less comfortable there, although, let's be honest, Belarus is taking such indirect steps to differentiate themselves from them, from Russians, at least a little bit, despite the fact that they are absolutely their ally, they are officially a union state, and so on, but they still lack Ukraine.
What about their economic potential? How strong is it still, and how much problems are already appearing, and what kind of crises can we use or not in the future?
Problems have already appeared, but again, we shouldn't deceive ourselves. Even according to official data, 41% is the defense budget. These are not normal figures. Almost all social programs, medical, educational, and so on, have been curtailed to fulfill this budget. The financial and economic impact on the Russian Federation is already noticeable. But again, as long as there is oil, gas, metal and precious metals and stones, they will balance.
Now let me go back to the beginning of the war, and to start with a recent interview with General Nayev, where he said that on the eve of the war he had no official information or document about when and where the enemy's offensive would begin. How would you comment on that?
You know, I'll just remind you that somewhere around October there was an interview in the United States when I showed a diagram of how the attack would be carried out, by what forces, from what directions. This was the information I made public at the time, so you know, if something is made public, it means it had been already discussed everywhere by the time. Let me remind you that it was October. You can see it right now in open sources.
Well, then I'll clarify that you said that on the eve of the war, you went into your office and prepared. And another General Syrskyi noted that the units of the main intelligence directorate played a key role in the defense of Kiev. I mean, I understand that this is proof that you were preparing, and we took certain measures. From what I can tell, what the Commander-in-Chief of the main intelligence directorate praises, and I have gone some way with him, and I know that he is very scrupulous about this. And if he said that there was indeed a significant contribution to the defense of Kiev, then there was. If I can give you some interesting details, maybe it was in Gostomel. I know that it was in Gostomel. It was in Gostomel, and exactly how it was prepared, and when they took part in repelling the enemy.
On February 24th, we accepted the fight. The answer is simple. I'm very pleased that the Commander-in-Chief mentioned this fact. I remember those days very well. We helped in every way. He was then in charge of the defense of the Kiev region, the entire Kiev region. From the very first days, we worked together with him fruitfully, which eventually yielded the result that all of us can feel now. The enemy was defeated. There are most powerful, even dangerous moments. It was the first time and lasted about 2 days, while the main forces of the 72nd Brigade were still coming in. And finally, there was not so much at the time, let's be honest. Then there were the events in the Kiev region, serious events that changed the course of the entire Russian operation there in Hostomel and prevented them from implementing their plan. Why did this plan fall apart in Kiev in 3 days? Because the heart of the plan was the landing of tactical airborne troops on the runway in Hostomel, and the planes were in the air. There are also well-known facts, but in the end we destroyed these planes. And secondly, it was the Moshchun. If Moshchun had fallen then, they would have entered Kiev from that direction at that time. These are the two biggest events, and the third significant one is the battles in Irpin, which ended up happening. They partially divided the Russian troops, just cut them up afterwards. Chronologically, the Russian retreat began then. The heart of the operation, the heart of the whole special military operation, that's why it was not called a war, but an operation, because it was supposed to end in 3 + 10 days. So to speak, no later than 14 days everything was supposed to be completely over.
Can you clarify the role of your units in the hostel? I wanted to do the same thing, so that if from what I can tell, which I understand, they were waiting for the enemy, if you can give me some details, what was done.
Certain specific groups were there. They were in other areas as well, but it is that area that is important for us. They just took over, let's say, together with the National Guard unit that was there for permanent deployment. We took the first battles, and in the end we created conditions under which the Russians could not land a single plane there. All of us did it together. Mr. Syrskyi helped a lot. At that time we did not have our own artillery. We managed to do it through coordination of operations, which was, as they say, done on the knees at the time. On the first day we prevented the hate of the landing, and the rest is history. As the saying goes, it was a derivative of that.
Starting from this question, how has the methodology of your unit's actions changed over these 3 years? I understand that a lot of innovation has been added. Deep strikes and other things, and maybe a lot of really cool operations have been done.
Innovation for us is that we created large detachments of units, which we didn't have before, because the conditions of the war in which we found ourselves dictated this. The classic actions of special forces groups no longer worked here. We needed large elements, and we did. the Shaman, Artan, Kraken units and so on. Since the enemy doesn't really want to meet with them, it means that this tactic was justified.
It's hard to disagree with you, and then to continue this topic. And what would you single out, for example, the three best operations of the main intelligence directorate during these wars?
I don't know. Even I would say that for the first operation was very important, not the small activities of groups on the enemy's territory. It was the large-scale events that took place in the Bryansk region, because there were many opinions from different people that it was unrealistic. It would cause a nuclear strike there, they said. I was sure that it would work. In the end, it worked. I think this is because of the combat operations. These are the most important. The operations that mattered the most, because the myth that combat operations cannot be brought to Russia was destroyed. There will be some kind of Armageddon here. It is not true.
By the way, I understand that they can answer directly. I'm going to put it a little bit differently. How many senior officers and generals in Russia are going to bed anxiously now?
Well, if you listen to this, you can ask the same question. And how do we have people, as they say, such creatures, who get used to everything? Unfortunately, it is true. The number of destroyed enemies is significant, I can tell you that, and we are the security service and actively engaged in this.
So the Ukrainian people, those who have experienced the most painful losses of this war in their families, can know that many people are working to make the enemy disappear.
A lot of people are working. For example, a recent story when a criminal was eliminated. For us, let's say a very famous one. And the one who brought great evil to us. The commander of the Iskander division, who launched a missile attack on the funeral in the village of Hroza, when about 50 people were killed and more than 100 were wounded, and so on. If you've been following our news for a month or so, it mysteriously went off on the territory of his military unit. People who bring evil, this evil always comes back to them. And we did not bring the first evil, but we have to return it.
Is there any data on how much this affects the enemy's moral and psychological state?
It always has an impact, but any impact has a certain period of time. One story will not have an impact for a lifetime.
The same question you were right to say that the war had to face. What challenges, including seeing its problems and its serious threats? Recently, on the third year of the war, a spy was discovered in the security service of Ukraine at a very high position of the Chief of Staff. Have there been any such cases in the main intelligence directorate? And what is being done to prevent such work of the enemy?
We have definitely not had such cases at this level. There is a Department of Internal Security. It is their task to prevent infiltration by agents, and not only. As for the case of the security service, I believe that this is a personal victory for General Maluk, who has uncovered perhaps one of the most powerful infiltrations. He is a good man, he works professionally. We have normal working relations. Moreover, there is an intelligence committee. Within this committee, everyone works absolutely officially. In addition, many activities are carried out on a bilateral basis.
So the interaction helps to create synergy in achieving goals.
There are such banal everyday issues, for example, the security servers, and there is a request for a certain person. They send it to everyone. Everyone gives the data they have on this person, which saves time at least.
Speaking of the enemy, there was a lot of talk before and during the war about who influences Putin, who is in his inner circle, who shapes his opinion and helps him make decisions. What is the situation now, or has something changed?
Nothing has changed. The only thing that has changed is Shoigu's role. The only thing. The Patrushev's role hasn't changed much. This is such an interesting point.
And what was the point of reshuffling him and appointing him to some kind of caricatured position?
This is not true. The position of the Secretary of National Security and Defense of the Russian Federation is a key position in Russia. The other question is that Shoigu himself was limited to it. Yes, and you know, the interesting thing is that his office is located in the Kremlin. It used to be at a different address. I'm saying that everything is not as simple as it seems at first. Changes are overdue, and they did what they did. But Shoigu did not become Patrushev. He can't even appoint his own deputies.
What about the new Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation? How is he perceived by Putin himself, his actions by society and the army?
He works normally. He is perceived technocratically. I mean, a person who is dealing with bureaucratic organization issues and so on.
I mean, after Shoigu's PR man, who showed a lot of things.
Here, this kind of work is more in the shadows, so to speak.
But does it give results?
You know, it does. Let's be honest, it does work. They were able to reduce the level of theft in the Russian army a little bit. They did it. It is there, but it has decreased. And in this, in turn, has the opposite effect. More reaches the armed forces of the Russian Federation and so on. This is on the surface.
By the way, the key issue in the media space right now is negotiations about a ceasefire or peace. And you once said that talking to Russia about peace is talking to murderers who are going to kill you. What can we expect from them at the negotiating table? What do they expect? Maybe some maximum and minimum.
Of course, carrot and stick tactics. As they say, they will always do this, put pressure on us, and offer various interesting, financially interesting things for other parties that will participate in this. It has always been like that, and nothing will change. There is another question here. Well, a truce or peace. These are completely different things, where you can quickly reach a truce. I just personally can say that in principle it is realistic. Truce is quickly, and peace is not.
Well, what is their point of view if there is any evidence? What is their point of view on the desire of the military and political leadership to make peace now in order to gain strength to move on?
They need a break, because according to their strategy, if they don't get out of this war by 2026, they lose even a chance for world leadership. They are left with a maximum level of regional leadership, which they are absolutely not satisfied with. I'm saying that the price of this war is too high financially. It prevents the country from developing, prevents it from engaging in large-scale projects and so on. There is a lack of technologies and technological solutions that are not available in the Russian Federation. First of all, for the development of the Arctic regions, for gas development there, and so on.
Of course they are strong due to totalitarian methods, but they have a lot of problems. I'm sure you are studying them, perhaps national, social, man-made factors. I would even say demographic.
There is definitely something to work with. You have listed it correctly. First of all, ethnic problems, religious and ethnic. A little bit man-made, but it's not something that can radically change the situation. But there is no leadership in Russia. If a leader appears, everything can change in one day, as it was with Prigozhin. For example, if there is no leader, no matter what the problems are, everything will be as it is. Putin has been knocking out all the brightest people in the government and the opposition for 25 years. The last Navalny was there for him to do that. And who were the last people he saw the threat among those in power? He has already removed everyone from his regime, and it is absolutely stable. There is no one who can pose a serious threat. There is simply no one there.
Can we have a little bit of futurology then? No one is eternal, because of various events, of course, and this is their strength and probably their weakness. If everything is concentrated on one person, what if he or she is gone one day?
Well, let's do your futurology, and I'll give you a history answer. This is an incorrect comparison, and you can't exactly compare people of completely different caliber, as people say. But in principle, let's take the example of Stalin. When Stalin died, and this is a historical fact, half of the country really cried. They were crying because it was terrible to see a man of such a great era go. But the next day, when the struggle for power began, and after a fairly short period of time, the 20th Congress of the Communist Party took place, de-Stalinization and the debunking of the cult of personality. It will be the same. You think that something else will happen, don't you? Imagine Solovyov saying that this is evil, he kept the country in a dictatorship, and so on. Well, history always repeats itself.
I agree with you and friends to the global. The change of administration in the United States, in any case, has significantly changed the world order, is already changing it. And how do you predict how this will affect the overall security problems in the world? From the stability of Euro-Atlantic unity to the Middle East, where the new US president promises to have a serious impact.
You know, I'm generally refraining from answering your question, but maybe I can try to comment a little bit on the fact that there is a state of strategic uncertainty for most countries in Europe and some countries in the Pacific region, because not everyone understands the steps that are being taken, but this is a state of uncertainty. This does not mean that everything will collapse now, nor does it mean that everything will only flourish. No, this is a period of uncertainty. You just have to recognize it and accept that this is the way it is now.
By the way, you said at the beginning of the conversation that the North Korean military and its technologies will be a problem in the Pacific region.
Listen, it will be a real problem there.
Is this of great interest to South Korea and Japan? Have relations with colleagues from that region intensified?
We actually had them a little bit. We intensified with South Korea when the arrival from the DPRK began. This is obvious. We are happy to pass them data on the activities of the North Koreans, and we have received something from them, normal working processes.
To another painful question, you are the head of the coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war. And are there any chances, within the framework of this trend that we have been talking about, that we are going to negotiate, that there is a chance to exchange all prisoners for all, including those who have been held captive since 2014?
I hope for this, first of all, and secondly, people who have been held since 2014. Very small batches, but we are returning them, don't forget about that. I believe that we will return everyone, because any war always ends with people returning to both sides. At the same time, don't forget that no matter who they are, Russians also have someone waiting for them in their families. The country maybe is not so much, but the families are waiting.
By the way, are there any taboos of the enemy whom they absolutely do not want to change?
There are no taboos, but there are problematic categories because of our information wars. You know how an information war has pros and cons. One of the disadvantages of all these measures is that certain, as they say, popular categories have become problematic for them and for us to exchange. We have Chechens, and even though they are shepherds from the mountains, and who needs them, but it is perceived by society as a very difficult issue for them. And for Azov, the Marines from the Azov in general, everything that concerns Mariupol, for us Chechens are such a vivid example.
Is it true that Kadyrov somehow influences the exchange of Chechens in the first place?
No, that is not true. You have to look at the statistics.
By the way, you were right to say that you have a powerful structure of strategic communications about information wars and information security, and you communicate in a rather unconventional way personally. And have you analyzed this experience, and how do you manage to effectively counter Russian propaganda? And do you manage to get ahead of it?
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. I will not say that we have lost, but we have also won. I think everyone will understand this. Our version of such a nationwide, not yet a victory, let's put it diplomatically in this sense. This is a massive disinformation program that they have launched to counter mobilization. Well, let's face it, the program is working seriously, and it has an impact on the consciousness of the population. But again, we go back to the origins of all this. It is a special information operation. It is clear that there are problems. They are exacerbating them. But look, in fact, one or two such sharp cases occur every week or so, but when you look at the internet, it seems that this happens every day, 100 times at a minimum. This is an example of professional and special information operations to influence consciousness.
So this old Soviet school just took into account the new trends of social networks?
The old school, everything was right there. I don't share the opinion of many people that we should destroy everything old and do something new. It is not true. It all works.
Well, I think somewhere you profess the same principle, that what works should be improved.
Only to improve, not to destroy, not to reform, and so on.
Let me continue this topic with the investigation. Now, in addition to the mobilization, there are allegations that Russia wants to undermine the political situation in the country.
This is happening. Let's also recognize that this is happening, as they say, many factors influence this, but this methodical work began in the fall of 2023. It began in the middle of 2023, aimed at preparing for the sowing of distrust in the government.
The enemy is still taking advantage of the fact that even stress-resistant people can no longer withstand 3 years of a great war. What kind of support do you think society needs? Perhaps messages from the military and political leadership, the defense forces?
There is an answer here, and unfortunately it may be a little bit unpleasant, but it is 1,000 years old. A tight society comes to life, wakes up only when there are victories. When there are no victories, nothing you will do will help. Therefore, we need victories, diplomatic, political, social, military, but victories.
In fact, the most experienced army now, at least on the continent?
Let's have a professional discussion. So the second most experienced army will be next to us, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yes. But I think that at least as an officer who served there in the 1990s and early 2000s, you remember that there was a kind of pacifism and a complete detachment of society from the army, which should be, let it be. To what extent has the attitude to this changed now, and how do you think we should build our defense system after a truce or peace?
This is a difficult and very painful question for me. I am afraid of a repeat of the events of the 90s. I am very afraid of this, and I hope that there will be no repeat of the mistakes that we made in the 90s. In fact, from 1992 to 2014. I really hope so. Because back then we also had the largest army in Europe, except for the Russian Federation, and the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. The material and technical base, the most modern equipment, veterans of Afghanistan. We had it all in our hands at the time, and we destroyed it all ourselves. You can say a lot about who was behind it, but it was done, and that's just a fact.
You said that this is a personal issue for you. You saw it in the 1990s. I saw it.
Unfortunately, I saw it as a child. But can you just look at the statistics, what was in Ukraine in 1991 and what we entered 2014 with? It is really scary. Even the issue of the Black Sea Fleet and its distribution, which was incorrect, wrong, and I agree with that, but what did we get in 1997, and what did we enter 2014 with? These are terrible numbers. We had 3 more frigates. It is just for your information. How many coastal missile systems, similar weapons did we have? We had an aviation group. We destroyed it all ourselves.
By the way, I wanted to know about you personally. How did you form your character? How did you form your worldview, your desire to choose this profession?
I remember reading a book when I was a kid. It was in translation, but it was a self-made man. I think it basically, I fall in this path.
Are you satisfied with it?
With what I see, I would like to do better, but in principle, more or less.
The image that society has formed of you, how does it correspond to how you see yourself?
Actually, people don't think much about it. Perhaps few people will believe this, but it is a very minor issue for me. I set a goal, and everything else doesn't matter to me until I reach it. I think that people see that we are doing our job well, and in a situation where the country lacks victories, we also lack them, but we have small ones from time to time, and this is the basis. This is my opinion.
Thank you very much for the conversation, and I wish you and your subordinates to have victories.